Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're listening to this on Monday, November the 7th. Welcome to the Podcast Daily. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Bill Landis. This is the Monday Rewatch. Unfortunately, Bill and I had to watch this Ohio State Northwestern game twice, and I'm not sure it got better the second time as I rewatched it, Bill, but I'm also going to say that some of the reaction that is immediate after a game like that, especially watching it on the field, is at least tempered a bit and tapered down a touch, because my opinion about the way the defense played kind of shifted. It didn't change as far as thinking that like there were things that happened that shouldn't have happened, like defensive line rotation, but I'm not going to make that a big thing. It does just make me wonder what's causing it, but or why it's happening when it is in the key moments of the games like it is. But again, I'm not going to belabor that point too much. Ohio State's 9-0. They beat Northwestern 21-7 on a day that the first thing I really felt rewatching the game is that TV did not do justice to how how bad it was at field level in Ryan Field, because with wind, you can't really see it on TV. Even you in the press box said after the game, you didn't really notice what the temperature or what the weather was like until it was raining and you saw it going directly sideways. And I actually remember the first play of this game on the rewatch, you see CJ Stroud come to the line of scrimmage and he's squinting because the wind is blowing directly into his eyes. And I don't think that was really, I don't know. You don't want to talk about the weather the whole time because it sounds like an excuse, and obviously both teams have to deal with it. But it was a much more inclement day than perhaps it looked on television.
Yeah, I felt that too. Watching the broadcast, had a better feel for it there in person, but not the front row seat that you had. But you could, it was bad. Like I said on the pregame podcast that we did, that when the wind gusted sort of to its full potential, it knocked me back a couple times because that's how strong it was. So like I don't want to talk too much about the weather either, because it does sound like excuse making. I guess the only thing I'll say is, if you have concerns about Ohio State's ability to play in inclement weather, I think those are fair. If you are assuming that this was like quote unquote normal Midwestern weather, it was not. It was very, very much out of the ordinary for that wind to be gusting the way it was. And then even when it wasn't gusting, it was still blowing pretty steadily. It had to be at least 30 miles an hour. Like it was just nonstop throughout the day. So it might happen again. And if you're worried about it happening again, like I think that's all well and good. But I just don't want people to come away thinking like, oh, well, what, it was cold and they played bad. Like, no, that was weird. That is not a normal Midwestern November Big Ten football game.
No, it was not like it was windy and then it stopped. It was windy, and then it got really windy, and then it got super windy, and then it slowed down and was just really windy. And it was not like, it wasn't just gusty. Like it was straight up windy the entire game. I mean, you guys were laughing about it in the car on the way to Chicago, saying that, the temperature was, or the weather forecast was saying gale force winds, but like, that's what it was. And it was definitely abnormal. And that leads me to my very first note, which is it's abnormal that JT Tuimoloau dropped an obvious pick six on Northwestern's first drive of the game that would have, I think, and I said this on Saturday night as we were back in the hotel, like that would have just changed the entire game right there. The game would have been over essentially from the third play of the game for Northwestern. But it just speaks to kind of how difficult and different this entire day was, because this is a situation where the Northwestern right tackle just basically let JT rush him instead of going out and getting him. And I don't think JT was ready for it to be that easy on that first play.
Yeah, but I still thought it was a little bit of a heady play from JT, because there was like kind of a free release there, but he didn't take up off the field. Like I think the idea is there, you kind of give him that space and let him take himself out of the play. But instead he kind of had his eyes up on the quarterback, saw what was happening. He got his hands up. Just couldn't quite make the catch. I'm not going to fault him too much for that based on what he did in the Penn State game. But I do think you're right that probably changes the tenor of things a little bit if you can start the game with a defensive score there for Ohio State. Maybe that helps settle in the offense a little bit more. But I still think it would have been pretty tough sledding either way, especially the thing I felt during the game, and the thing I continue to feel having rewatched it, is Ohio State probably tried a little too hard to throw the ball in that game, and maybe could have. Maybe it sounds counterintuitive because of the rushing game struggles, but drop back and try to pass almost 30 times on a day when the wind was blowing like that just seemed to probably put the offense in some tougher situations than it needed to be.
Yeah, and watching it the first time, I thought that the Buckeyes were pretty even with like when they were throwing it, which quarter, but they only threw it 9 times into the wind in the entire game, and so I think they were obviously adapting to that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the first quarter and the third quarter, they only threw it. First quarter and fourth quarter, they only threw it into the wind 9 times. So they obviously were recognizing that it was going to be difficult, and I think that they weren't expecting was that throwing with the wind was actually just as challenging because again, if you're a receiver running a route and all of a sudden the ball that you expect is coming at you 40 miles an hour ends up coming at you 60 because the wind gust picks it up, it becomes like trying to catch a change up when you're expecting a fastball or expecting a fastball trying to catch a fastball when you're expecting a change up. And it changes the way you view everything. And you could see that all of the drops came going with the wind. Right. Cade
That
Stover's
sounds
drops.
right. Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, I think that there was actually something to the, as you mentioned in Snap Judgments, Emeka Ibuka talked about eye discipline. And I think it's pretty clear that if you rewatch it with all of the drops going with the ball, going in with the wind, it changes the way that you're expecting things to get on you. And certainly made it a little bit difficult to catch. I mean, again, I don't want to talk about the weather the whole time, but if we don't talk about the weather when talking about the offensive game plan and the offensive play calling, then I think that we're not being fair because clearly that's what dictated everything they did offensively.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Northwestern, I think, had a drop too going that way. Maybe they might have had 2 drops going that way. One was like a crucial one late in the game when it was 14-7, and they were trying to move the ball there a little bit. But I guess I don't want to overanalyze either team's passing game from this day because it's just really hard to tell. Like there were some plays, I think, if you're watching it as Ohio State fan, you think to yourself like, man, CJ looks off or he missed that throw, or there was definitely some miscommunications on where routes were supposed to go. It looked like one time CJ kind of blamed himself, and the other time maybe he thought the receiver should have been somewhere else. But on the misfires and honestly even some of the drops, like I don't know. I don't want to read too much into that because of the conditions. But on the flip side of that, I think you can still glean a lot from Ohio State's inability to move Northwestern off the line of scrimmage, even in those conditions, because that's something I think you should be able to do no matter what kind of conditions you're playing in.
Yeah. If I'm going to circle one thing coming out of this game that I'm most worried about, it's that the Buckeyes' inability to get a push in the running game. And it feels like it's almost entirely on the right side of the offensive line when you're not getting the push. But if you rewatch, Donovan Jackson, again, did not have a great game. He has seemed to take a couple steps backwards. Matthew Jones, as we've talked about a lot in the last couple weeks, does not seem to be himself, is not playing at the same level he played at the beginning of the season. And you don't know how much of it is the injury or what, but whatever's happening, he's ending up on his body, is laying on the ground a lot when he shouldn't be. And there's just no drive. They're just not getting any push from those guys. And I think that, Luke Whippler, I thought, played another fairly decent game. The pass protection was good for the most part from Ohio State. Paris Johnson played a pretty good game from what I could see. I didn't see any moments even in the run blocking where he looked like he was whiffing or really getting beat up. There's just no push up the middle from Donovan Jackson and Matthew Jones right now, and that is my biggest concern moving forward for Ohio State.
There were a couple plays where after the play, like his guys are kind of like walking around and get back to the line of scrimmage or get back to the huddle or whatever. Just like Matt Jones didn't look comfortable, was like limping around. And we don't know exactly what he's dealing with that foot. But we know that it's a lower leg thing that's kind of been bothering him all year. And I suspect that's catching up to him. And I also wonder too, I wonder if it's not a coincidence that the 2 guys on the offensive line who have never played a full season of college football as offensive linemen seem to be wearing down a little bit. And Donovan Jackson and Matthew Jones, like Matthew Jones is a veteran, but this is the first time he's been a full-time starter. Yeah. And Donovan Jackson is a sophomore who never started before this year either. And I do think that those are the 2 weak spots that you identify right now. They're just not getting the knockback when they do those wide hitting zone runs. They're kind of getting pushed back a little bit. They're getting creased and guys are getting through there, and that's blowing up a lot of these runs. But like I don't know what the solution is to that. Like I don't think you're going to replace both your guards. Yeah. Maybe if Matthew Jones is hurt, and it does seem to be the case, maybe you think about sitting him down and maybe giving Enoch Vimahi a try. But I don't know. You're this late in the season. I think that's a delicate thing to mess with the offensive line chemistry too. So I don't know that there's like an easy answer to that.
Yeah, and I don't like to be the type to say, "Oh well, here it is. These guys aren't good, and you just play someone else." Because obviously, we don't get to see the Buckeyes in practice every day. We don't get to see what Justin Fry and the other coaches see. So clearly, they're playing the guys they're playing for a reason, and Matthew Jones must still be doing things the right way in practice. But obviously, practice is different than the game. In practice, you know pretty much exactly what the opposing player is going to do. You've played against the same guy for the last 4 months straight. You know all the moves of every player. To me, as you're watching these guys play, I just seeing that they're just not getting a push, and I don't know what is caught. There's just not enough drive from those guys. And with Matthew Jones, if it is a foot issue, you can sort of understand that if he's not able to get enough leverage to really move a guy. But you're seeing Ohio State having to, and its running backs having to make adjustments in the backfield nearly every play. And kudos to Mayan Williams, who, rewatching this game, I thought he played pretty well, actually, all things considered.
Yeah.
For the number of times that he was met in the backfield and had to make plays. And you wrote about it on Sunday at ohiostate.rivals.com. Like he only had one loss, one carry for negative yards. And that says something for Mayan Williams based on what you see on the tape, because it looks like he's being forced to make his first move 2 yards deep nearly every time.
Yeah, he should have probably had 4 or 5 negative runs in this game, and it's not a position I think you want to be in, but they really need him right now because he is the guy who's capable of turning nothing into something. I think at a greater rate than Travion Henderson is when he's healthy and available. I thought it was like super impressive for Mayan to basically not play last week, have the knee thing that's been lingering for him, have the hand thing that popped up last week at Penn State, come into the game kind of cold and crappy conditions when where they know that you're going to run the ball, and he carries it 26 times for 111 yards on a day when they really needed it. So it's not if you like scroll his game log, I don't know if it's a game that'll really jump out at you immediately, but given the context of it, I thought it was probably his best performance of the year.
Yeah, and not to sound too like cliche or too much like I'm supporting an agenda of some sort, but this is another game where you saw the Ohio State offensive line and Mayan Williams really start to wear down the opponent in the fourth quarter, and those runs were getting chunkier and chunkier as things went along. And I don't have a lot of notes on the offense because, as we said Saturday after the game, like I don't think that there's a lot of reason to carry this tape forward, with the exception of the man-to-man execution of the offensive line, which again, that said, I do think that the Buckeyes tried to be a little bit more creative in the running game. They ran a lot of different stuff. They didn't run the same, formation over and over again or same blocking scheme over and over again. They did a lot of different things, but when you're trying to run with 9 guys in the box, it's not easy. And again, kudos to Mayan Williams for making things happen, and for CJ Stroud and Ryan Day to adjust to that and realizing that he had to try to even up the numbers a little bit with CJ Stroud in the running game, because that really is what won the game for Ohio State. But I think it was funny, like in the first quarter, CJ had that first run of the day where you could sort of see that he would realize he was going to need to do some of that. And it's 3rd and 8, and he runs for 7. And you just see the inexperience running the ball because he doesn't do the thing that everyone does where you put out the ball or you just take that extra step and skirt out of bounds. Instead, he just went out of bounds. And it's like, this is where maybe running a little bit more, you'd have a little bit better feel for that.
Yeah, he had it in his left hand on the inside hand, closest to the sideline. And if he just had it in his right hand, it probably would have been a first down. But yeah, I think that is a little bit of an experience, or it's just I don't want to say lack of awareness because that probably sounds too critical. But I just think it's something he has to get comfortable with. But he's another guy too who, again, like maybe he didn't have his best stuff throwing the ball. I don't know if that's true or not. It's hard for me to gauge given the conditions. But for him to run the way he did, I thought was a good sign. For him to block, or I don't know if block might be the wrong word, but interfere with a defender on the Mayan Williams touchdown run, I thought was good to see from him too. So I don't know. There are things you can pull from this that I think can make you feel good, or maybe they're like, I don't know, quote unquote gritty or whatever. I just like the offensive line is concerning to me. It has been for the last 2 weeks. And I think maybe there are some people who weren't as concerned about that coming in like over the last 2 weeks because those were better defenses. But like Northwestern's run defense is terrible. And they got really worked up front a lot, or at least in the beginning of the game. And I just think they have to be better than that. And I don't know. I asked Ryan Day about the run game a lot last week. I don't
How
know
excited do you think he's going to be to talk to you on Tuesday?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't know if I want to ask about it again, and it's not because like I'm like tired of it or don't want to do it. It's just like I don't know that the answer is going to be any different. And honestly, I'm at the place right now with the rushing attack where it's like we'll see on November 26th. But we'll see. I don't think they're a very good rushing team right now. I don't know if they can get back to looking how they looked earlier in the year. I don't know if it's going to matter when they play Michigan, but we'll see if it does. But the next 2 weeks, it's just like, I don't know. They can run for 300 yards, and I don't think it'll mean very much, or they can run for 50 yards, and I don't think it'll mean very much. I just want to see what it looks like when the time comes against Michigan, and if it'll matter. So I don't know.
I mean, they ran for 200 they ran for 200 on Saturday, but 76 of them are from CJ Stroud, and 15 of them are from Emeka Egbuka, and so you start to. And that's all part of the running game. So kudos. I mean, I'd love to see more of Emeka Egbuka in the running game or more in the pop passes. If you think back to the 2018 offense with Paris Campbell and the things that did for the quarterback when he was struggling, the things that allowed JT Barrett and Dwayne Haskins and guys to do when they were using players like that, like Curtis Samuel and Paris Campbell. Emeka Egbuka has that sort of skill set. I think you should probably try to use it. He is not quite as short, space quick as Jackson Smith and Jigba. So he's not as good like in the screen game as Jackson is. But if you give him the ball just moving forward, he's got a lot of wiggle and he's got a lot of straight line speed to get around the edge. And, to me, that he reminds me a little bit of Paris Campbell in that way. But he's a little bit bigger and maybe more physically ready to handle the rigors of that. So I think that there's ways to just keep improving it from here on out. But you certainly aren't going to learn who you are against Indiana and Maryland. Like that test of like, what is our identity? Are we actually tough? Which has been the entire talk of the last 10 months. I guess we thought maybe you had an answer about that in the first 6 weeks. And that answer does not feel the same right now. And I imagine those guys are going to take it personally. We saw it a little bit on Wednesday night, when talking to the offensive linemen, they were taking it personally, but then you come out and get beat at the point of attack by Northwestern. I just don't think that that's excusable when you're talking about Ohio State football. That is a major concern. Yeah,
I do want to point out. I'm going to butcher this guy's name, but number 99 for Northwestern. I think it's Adetomiwa Adebaware. Absolute monster. Like, he was kicking butt that entire game up front. So like, I want to make sure that we don't just when stuff like this happens. Obviously, we analyze Ohio State and talk about what went wrong and what went right. But I like every now and then to point out a guy who plays really well for the other team I've never heard of. And that guy had an excellent game.
I mean, that is the thing. Like, these guys are all on scholarship, but Ohio State in general is a much more talented team on the football field than Northwestern is. What we saw on Saturday was the combination of a team that was much more disciplined and a team that really was just playing because they had nothing to lose. And I thought that, in that situation, as I said on Snap Judgments on Saturday, like, when talent equates, it comes down to just personal execution. Are you doing your job? And I think at times, and Emeka Egbuka alluded to that, he said, sometimes they get a little bit lazy as the receivers because it always comes so easy to them. And I think the same can be said of the offensive line, because when they get going, when they really are at their peak, they are a dominant unit, but they're not being one right now. And they only have a short amount of time to get that right, because it's November 7th and Michigan's in 19 days. And Michigan does not seem to be having any problems with their attitude up front. They have their own problems. Obviously, it's not a flawless football team, but their strength certainly seems to match up fairly well with what appears to be Ohio State's weakness.
It does. And I don't know, maybe some people feel that might be the case too on the defensive side of the ball based off what they saw in this game. I don't know. What did you think of rewatching the way Northwestern was able to run the ball a little bit?
That's where I think I have the biggest difference of opinion from Saturday to now. We'll talk about it after this break. Yeah, I mean, I thought that the guys that played okay. My biggest issue with rewatching the defense on Saturday was the combination of linebackers and safeties being a little bit slow to trigger at a point and in a game where it seemed pretty obvious Northwestern was not going to throw the ball. So when they are trying to run the Wildcat, when they have the situation set up where they're running a ton of read option, I don't know what Lathan Ransom Ronnie Hickman and those guys were playing back the way they were for. I don't think Steel Chambers played a particularly good game, though I did have obviously a big tackle in the second quarter that led to the punt, which led to Ohio State's first touchdown. And so, that was a huge moment for him. He also saved another 3rd and 8 run, stopped the quarterback scramble. I just see this as a concern down the road when you're playing against teams that can actually throw the ball out of these formations. And that's my biggest concern. Defensive line wise, as we talked about, my only real concern is that Larry Johnson continues to play guys that are just not making anything happen. When you have 40 snaps between Jerron Cage and Ty Hamilton, and you get 2 tackles out of them in a game that Northwestern ran the ball 60 times, I just don't understand what the impulse is to continue playing them.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel as well. I wrote about it on Rivals on Sunday morning, but my things with defense are defensive line rotation, which you just also voiced concern about, and the slowness to adjust to some bigger personnel packages from Northwestern. Just getting an extra linebacker out there when it's 6-7 offensive linemen and 2 other tight ends out there. Like you just need more bigger bodies. And that's not a criticism of the 4-2-5 in general. Like I don't want it to come off that way. I know some people had concerns about that coming into the season. I don't think that's what happened. I think the 4-2-5 is a fine defensive structure to defend the run. And Jim Knowles' Oklahoma State defense was an excellent run defense last year, and has been pretty good this year, by and large, playing out of a 4-2-5. But when teams do what Northwestern was doing, which is take your quarterback off the field and basically play single wing football with a bunch of linemen, you need to get some bigger bodies on the field. And when they did that, I thought it looked okay. They had the back-to-back plays was the fourth quarter, right? When Tommy Eichenberg jumped over the pile to stop the quarterback sneak, lost his helmet, had to come off the field, and then on the next play, third quarter, first drive of the third quarter. You're right. Right. Ball near midfield. Northwestern threatening to drive it again and possibly score. Tommy Eichenberg jumps over the pocket. The QB sneaks stop on 3rd and 1. 4th and 1. They have 4 linebackers out there. Tommy's not one of them because he lost his helmet. But Teron Vincent just stood up. I think it was the center, build a wall there. Palier Note comes crashing off the edge. There was a 3rd player in there too. Ronnie Hickman,
Lathan Ransom, I think, is the guy that made the tackle.
Yeah. Just really, really good point of attack, stout, short yardage defense. So that I thought was encouraging because that's certainly something they're going to need when they go up against Michigan. So it wasn't all bad, but I think the bad that we saw seemed like maybe it was more personnel driven than anything else. So that seems maybe relatively easy to address so long as they play the top guys when it matters most.
Yeah, but it's also about the top guys learning how to identify things that they haven't seen much of this year. The Buckeyes, for as modern as college football has gotten with offenses, have not played a lot of that read option stuff this year. They, Zach Harrison and JT Tuimoloau played it pretty well against Penn State. I thought they both struggled a little bit on Saturday, figuring out what to do with the quarterback keep option there and crash down a lot of times, which is fine if the linebackers and safeties are making tackles. And
yeah, there's got to be somebody else there.
Unfortunately, what happened on Saturday was that those guys didn't seem to be in position to make the tackles. And I don't know why that was. If it was because, as you mentioned, Northwestern essentially has 9 offensive linemen out there. They've got tight ends wearing number 98 and that are 6'5", 280 pounds blocking Lathan Ransom. But ultimately, JT Tuimoloau made a number of big plays when it mattered. He had a couple really nice plays in the fourth quarter. I thought Zach Harrison played a kind of muted game overall. Jack Sawyer was in a couple of times where he had chances to make plays and just missed. And that was sort of the whole day. And I don't know if it's the grass. I don't know if it was just not knowing where the ball was going to be, if it was just the eye discipline not being where it needed to be. But I didn't feel like the Buckeye defense played anywhere near the speed it's been playing the first 8 weeks of the season. They just looked a little uncertain of what to do. And multiple times you see them looking over at the sideline, hands up, going, what are we doing? And that's just not something we've seen all year long. And it is something that I've talked about with Austin on previous podcasts in the last couple of years. That happened all the time in 2021 where they'd look to the sideline and be like, I don't know what we're doing. And for whatever reason, communication just did not seem to be as efficient on Saturday as it has been all year.
I agree. It's kind of like front of mind for me to ask Jim Knowles about when I'm assuming we'll talk to him on Tuesday. I know Austin and I usually do that Tuesday mornings on a daily, but um, that was new. I don't recall seeing that at any other point this year. Just and confusion. Like they weren't running around like with their heads cut off, but they were looking to the sideline quite late. And at times I thought to myself, well, they're not going to get set before the ball was snapped. And they would get set like just before the ball was snapped. And I don't know. I have to be honest. I didn't watch a ton of Northwestern going into that game. I don't know if those formations are things that didn't show up a lot on tape, or if the quarterback run stuff is something they weren't really concerned about, so they didn't work on it much. Because there was, when you're defending that and the end squeezes down as aggressively as those guys were, typically you're doing that because you think that there's a linebacker who's kind of scraping over the top and replacing you, who has to take the quarterback. And I don't know if that happened one time. No, I don't know if that's because those guys at the second level weren't executing their job as they were told to do, or if they just didn't have those calls in because they weren't expecting what they saw. But clearly there was something off with the way that they wanted to attack Northwestern in that game, or they were caught off guard a little bit maybe by the way that Northwestern was attacking them, which did feel a little out of character for a defense that largely has felt like very organized and very quick to find answers this year. So I'm not like looking at that thinking to myself like, oh boy, they've got a problem, because that hasn't really crept up much before this, but it did stick out because of how infrequently it had happened prior to that game.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if I'm overreacting to what I've seen out of J.K. Johnson the last couple of weeks. He just seems really reluctant to hit people. It seems a little bit like he's being pushed around by wide receivers. He had on the touchdown for Northwestern, he was obviously, being blocked by a left tackle and had no chance. But it just seems like he's not being as physical as he was in his first couple opportunities to play. And I think that's why we saw Jair Brown so early and so often in the game against Northwestern, because Jair is a guy that is going to throw his head into a pile and hit someone. I'm now curious again about Jordan Hancock. He did not play at all on Saturday, and I have no idea why that is. He did not seem to be having any sort of injury issues. We saw Denzel Burke get banged up a little bit and do some limping around. We saw the same out of Jack Sawyer, the same out of Cade Stover. Obviously Matthew Jones had to, take the first couple plays of the game. His shoe fell off on the first play, and he had to take some reps out. And Enoch Famahi gets in, and they just seem to just be entirely as a team just not ready for contact on Saturday. I don't know why it was. G. Scott dropped, you got to fight through and catch the ball. And if you think about the first series of the game, you have, the completions or incompletions in the first couple series to G. Scott, to Julian Fleming. The Buckeyes just not doing things that they have done all year long and fight through and make a catch in traffic. And, watching Cade Stover drop balls, watching the lack of physical pressure from Teron Vincent or from Zach Harrison. I mean, again, Michael Hall played 19 snaps, but when he was in there, he seemed to be effective and able to create a pass rush right up the middle, but then he just doesn't play. So it's just, I just felt like as a team, they totally sleptwalked into this game. And I thought it was more evident that they did that on TV.
And I guess it's not ultimately surprising that they would, coming off of the game they came off of, playing this opponent, walking into that stadium where there's absolutely no juice. Like it's part of the fight of college football to kind of like be locked in week to week, and I don't know that any team does that. So I don't think that makes Ohio State abnormal. It's just that happened, and it coincided with crazy weather where they're basically relegated to being one dimensional. Now, I don't say that as an excuse, because I do think there are real problems right now. I think there are two things. If I had to pick one thing on each side of the ball, and I was talking about this with Austin in the car ride after he dropped you off when we're driving back to Columbus. He brought up this point that it felt like over the beginning of the season, you heard a lot of like, oh, we're doing good on good in practice. Like practice has been really physical. And I think that had been ratcheted up a little bit during the week, and you were seeing the benefits of it on Saturdays. Now you're late in the year. You want to make sure guys are healthy for the home stretch. I wonder if they're pulling back a little bit on that at all during practice. And then the result is you get in the games on Saturday where the two things that stick out to me right now are the offensive line just not getting on and staying on blocks and creating movement. And I think like tackling for the defense too has been pretty. They had 15 missed tackles according to Pro Football Focus in this game, and I think it happened in the Iowa game and the Penn State game where just guys are hitting people and sort of falling off or hitting and not wrapping up. Those two things combined are kind of problematic to me because football at its base form is blocking and tackling. And I don't think Ohio State's doing either particularly well at the moment.
It's funny though. I mean, a month ago the question was, "Hey, are you guys going to dial this back in practice as you get into the later half of the season because you got a bunch of dudes getting hurt?" And now the question has to be asked: Are you doing it enough? And it just speaks to the weird balance that you have to have a successful season. And I think the biggest thing to me is that it's concerning is because Ryan Day has made it a point over and over and over to talk about competitive stamina, and then you go out and you lay this egg. And again, I say that knowing fully that it was a bizarre day. Like it's an anomaly in not just a football way, but like world way. Like it was a weird day. The weather was very strange, but no one cares if the weather's good. Like,
right.
like, and it's fine. And I think that if you look at the way that the pollsters reacted, I think people understand it. I think, for Ohio State fans out there, they're like, oh, the Buckeyes are struggling. Oh, the weather has to be perfect for them, blah, blah, blah. I don't buy that at all. CJ Stroud threw for almost 500 yards in terrible conditions at Michigan last year. But if you watch the third and fourth quarter of the Georgia-Tennessee game, you saw what weather does to teams. That game completely changed. Teams couldn't move the ball, couldn't hold on to the ball. Like that is playing in the Midwest. And the question is, if you're a team built almost exclusively for the run and gun, of fun and gun, whatever you want to call it, when you have a moment like this, do you have the ability to switch what you're doing and do it well enough to beat anyone in the country? And that is what everything is about for Ohio State from this point forward. Do you have enough? If we come into November 26th and it's 37 degrees and snowing and rain and wind blowing, are you going to be man enough to line up across from the Michigan's interior offensive and defensive lines and win the game? And I think that there's a legitimate question to be had or to be asked about that right now, because you don't see those guys, and I'm saying this on the offensive line and defensive line, whichever defensive linemen are in, I don't see them out there believing that they are going to dominate people. And that is a concern to me, because that running the ball, you talk about football being about tackling and blocking. Running the ball effectively is just about attitude. It is about want to and saying, I am going to beat you. And I don't see that sort of swagger from this Ohio State offensive line right now that I would have anticipated. That is my biggest concern.
Yeah, I don't feel it or see it either. I thought maybe they were getting to it, and perhaps I overstated where they were about midseason. I don't know, and it could very well play out that they don't need to be that to accomplish their goals this year. But I think you want to be able to feel confident in it if it came to that point, and there's not a lot of reason to be confident in it right now. I don't think there's any team in the country in even average to or better conditions that can stop Ohio State's passing attack. As long as they are able to throw the ball, I think they can throw the ball on anybody. But things could pop up between now and the playoff, or I guess now in the Big Ten championship, where that becomes difficult. And I have not been encouraged by what I've seen in the last 3 weeks when it comes to believing that they could find a way to get through that if they're not able to throw the ball.
And that to me is, I don't intend to be doom and gloom. I mean, the reality is, if you look at everyone around the country, every team has clear deficiencies. Georgia I think is playing the best of anyone in the country right now over the course of the season. They should be number one on Tuesday. Ohio State, up until the last 2 weeks, I think, had been the best, most complete team in the country. Right now, I don't buy that. But it's not like Georgia is flawless. They almost, they should have lost at Missouri. They could have very easily lost to Kent State. Like this is not a situation where they're that much better, but they seem to be peaking and getting better, where Ohio State seems to be not. And that is the issue for me as I see it. But doesn't mean it's impossible to recover, or that the Buckeyes may as well just not even line up in November 26th. But you got to come out and figure out, do you want this? And are you going to prove it on a weekly basis? And that means this week. That means Indiana. That doesn't mean sleepwalk through another noon game against a team that doesn't belong on the field with you. Indiana's not going to come out and be afraid of Ohio State. And that's the one thing I think has really changed in the last few years, because of this belief that Ohio State is a soft team, or that they are finesse. I don't see anyone in the league really thinking that they're going to come in to Ohio Stadium and not thinking they have a shot if they can just do one or two things right. And that's something that I wouldn't have anticipated a few years ago. And I think Ryan Day's obviously cognizant of that and working to fix it with some of the changes to the roster and the way that they're trying to rebuild things. But it certainly is concerning that teams are not like intimidated by Ohio State right now, and they're not.
Yeah, it feels like they think that they can come out and maybe try to punch Ohio State in the mouth. Now, that doesn't always work. Sometimes they come out and do it, and they swing, and then Ohio State throws the ball 70 yards over your head, and the game's over. But sometimes that first punch can land, and I think Ohio State has been better at taking those kind of lumps this year and finding a way. I do want to give them some credit for that. I think they are tougher, if that's what you want to call it, maybe than they were last year. At least I feel that way at the moment. But I don't. It's a different animal when they play Michigan. But
yeah, well,
I will say
that leads right into my last note, which says they've won 28 straight against unranked teams, more than anybody in the country, and I don't think that they win this game Saturday in 2018. I don't think they win this game last year because I felt like they didn't have the mental toughness to be imperfect and win. But you are seeing that improvement, but no one wants that improvement because you don't want to have to deal with imperfection to have to prove it.
Right. And no one is going to give you your flowers for like finding a way to be
Right.
to beat Northwestern, regardless of the circumstances. The Ohio State is better than Northwestern to the point where they should have moved that team up and down the field on Saturday. I don't care if it was played in a hurricane, like a Category 5 hurricane. They should have been able to do that, and they didn't. So, but they have 2 weeks before the Michigan game. Again, I said it before the Northwestern game. It still remains true now. They can build better habits and good habits and try to get back to playing a more I don't know, complete style of football, I guess, that they were playing before they had their week off, which has seemed to have eluded them a little bit here over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think it's just about attitude from here on out. You got to know you're better and play like it. And, there were a lot of people talking about how good they were in the first 6 weeks of the season. And I'm not saying that it was rat poison or any of that stuff, but certainly now you got to listen to it on the other side and people doubting you. And so I guess you'll find out as a program, does that bother you? And are you willing to, do what it takes to prove that it's not correct? So who knows? Anything else?
Nope. I think we hit on everything I had here. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be a lot more talk about this game and what it means and, what Buckeyes have to do coming out of it. But that will, happen throughout the week on the podcast and over at ohiostate.rivals.com. You can sign up there using promo code DTE30 to get a free month. And join us in the Letterman, the Horseshoe Lounge. Sorry, sometimes you still get lost. I was talking about 2021. Anyway, that's Bill Landis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. We'll be at Roosters on Olentangy River Road on Monday, about 11:30 a.m. If you want to join us there, we'll be talking more ball and eating some wings. And otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for Monday on the podcast. But you'll see us there, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye.